The sweetness lingered where it should have vanished, coating the air, coating the tongue, refusing to leave as though it carried a will of its own. It was not the sweetness of joy, nor the sweetness of a feast, but the sweetness of something rotting beneath lace, something that clung too long and refused to let go. In the dim kitchen, Miriam bent low over the bowl, her dark hands steady, though her breath was shallow, stirring as though the spoon were a pendulum that kept time with her heartbeat. Slow and relentless, they said sugar was a blessing. The white dust that made bitter things bearable, the dust that planters prized above flesh itself. Yet Miriam stirred it as though it were a curse that must be coaxed into awakening. The fire beneath the iron pot hissed with an oily spit, and the shadows on the wall bent toward her, drawn to the rhythm of her hand, her eyes deep, unspeaking, unbroken, gleamed with something not of this world, older than obedience, older than hunger, older even than the bones buried beneath the cotton fields. For Miriam carried within her the songs her mother had sung in whispers, the stories her grandmother had buried in the marrow of her bones, tales of sweetness that could turn bitter, and bitterness that could turn sweet. A storm pressed against the windows, though the sky was dry, the timbers of the kitchen groaning with a weight that was not the wind. Each grain of sugar that fell into the bowl landed like a tolling bell, a white speck glimmering for a moment, before vanishing into the mixture. Swallowed, consumed, absorbed, and Miriam's lips barely moved. Yet words came all the same, words not meant for ears, words not meant for men, words that coiled like smoke in the rafters and were lost among the spiders. 13 spoons, 13 breaths, 13 debts unpaid, she whispered. Though no one stood beside her, the sweetness thickened, the scent filling the room with a weight that pressed down, a perfume that did not invite but suffocated. And in that air Miriam remembered the faces at the table, the masters, the wives, the overseers who licked their lips when she served them, their laughter sharp, their commands sharper, their cruelty as ordinary as the sun. She remembered the bruises beneath her sleeves, the whispers in the quarters when the moon was high, the counting of names never spoken aloud, names of those who had not returned from the fields. The sweetness lingered for them as well, a promise carried on the tip of her spoon. Behind her the door rattled, though no hand touched it, as though the air itself pressed close, seeking to taste what she stirred. The flame beneath the pot flickered green for the span of a breath, before returning to its natural hue. But Miriam did not startle. She did not falter. She stirred on. The bowl seemed deeper than before, as though it could swallow the kitchen whole if she willed it. And each turn of the spoon sounded like earth falling upon a coffin lid. A mouse darted across the floorboards but stilled mid-step, caught in the silence that stretched around her, its tiny body trembling, as though it too could taste the sweetness and feared it. Sugar for their tongues, Miriam murmured. Sugar for their bones. And her voice was not her own, but carried the weight of women whose names the ledgers never kept. Somewhere beyond the walls, laughter rose from the house, high, drunken, careless laughter. Yet within the kitchen that laughter warped, twisted and faded into coughs that were not yet real. Coughs that lived only in the air of what was to come. The sweetness clung thicker, turning the air into syrup, turning breath into labor, until even Miriam felt it coil against her chest, testing her, pressing her, reminding her of the price all sweetness demands. Her spoon slowed but did not stop, and with the final circle, she pressed the edge hard against the bowl. A sound like a blade dragged across stone. Final and deliberate, then she lifted it, heavy, trembling with a weight beyond its metal, and let the thickened mixture fall back into the pot with a hiss like flesh meeting flame. The sweetness did not fade, it grew, it spread into the beams, into the walls, into the cracks of the floor, seeping outward like blood hidden beneath lace, and Miriam, her hands steady, her eyes hollow with something older than grief, whispered to the air that bent close to hear her. They will taste it, they will carry it, and it will not leave them, not in this life, not in the grave. The fire hissed agreement, the shadows nodded against the wall, and the bowl shivered in her grip, as though it too longed to be emptied into mouths that had laughed too long. In the silence after, the sweetness clung heavy, suffocating, unbearable, a sweetness that would linger long after throats closed and voices fell still. And outside, unseen, the crickets paused their song, as though they too waited for the first taste, the first gasp, the first silence. The sweetness lingered, and Miriam smiled, though it was not the smile of joy, not the smile of victory, but the smile of someone who has stirred a truth that cannot be unstirred. And as she poured the mixture into the waiting dish, the kitchen seemed to tilt, the very earth beneath the house groaning with the weight of what it would soon hold. The sweetness lingered too long, and it was only the beginning. The smoke did not rise as it should have. It did not drift light and careless toward the rafters, as any kitchen smoke would. It curled low, coiling thick as breath upon cold glass. Heavy and alive, pressing against the beams as though it sought a place to anchor itself. And in that thickening haze Miriam's name was spoken. Though no lips parted, no throat moved, no breath carried the sound, Miriam. The syllables long and drawn, like cloth torn slow. Like roots pulled from damp earth, her hand faltered for a heartbeat. The wooden spoon trembling in the iron pot. The syrup within bubbling with a sound too much like a laugh, too much like a throat closing. But she did not look around. She did not turn her head. She stirred on. For she had known from the first grain that sweetness would not come alone. The voices multiplied, soft at first, overlapping like threads pulled through the same needle, rising and falling, some high, some low, some whispering, some groaning. They spoke her name, but also words she could not understand, syllables fractured, splintered, as though they had been buried too long and now came up cracked and unfinished. The smoke bent toward her cheek, brushed against her jaw like the breath of the dead, warm and wet, lingering, and she whispered without meaning to, her lips barely parting, "I hear you." The fire spat as though in reply, a sharp hiss, and the voices grew clearer. Some were women, their tones worn thin by weeping. Some were men, low and guttural, their words dragged as though through mud. But all of them pressed her name against her skin, a chant without rhythm, a litany without mercy. Miriam felt the back of her neck prickle, the hairs lifting though no draught moved, the weight of unseen eyes pressing into her spine. She dared not glance toward the doorway, for she knew if she did, she would see shapes forming in the edges of the smoke, shapes that remembered chains, shapes that remembered fire, shapes that remembered silence too long endured. The spoon circled, and with each circle the whispers thickened, the smoke gathering not upward but inward. Drawing itself into knots above her head, it clung to the beams, pulsed, throbbed like a blackened heart, pressing against wood too thin to contain it. The voices rose, many at once, hissing, groaning, some pleading, some cursing, all pressing her name until it no longer sounded like a name but like the tolling of iron against bone. And Miriam, sweat streaking down her face, muttered beneath her breath, "I stir for you, I stir for them. I stir until it is finished." A silence struck then, sudden and deep, as though the house itself held its breath. Only the bubbling syrup broke it, the sound sharp, wet, hungry. Then from the darkest coil of smoke came a single voice, louder than the rest, steady, clear, not whisper but command. 13 must feed. Miriam's fingers clenched hard against the spoon, her knuckles whitening, her throat dry though her mouth filled with sweetness she had not tasted. The smoke pressed down, lowering, thickening, curling like a serpent circling its prey. Testing her, waiting, she did not tremble, though her heart pounded hard. Her body knew the danger, her blood remembered it, and still she stirred, spoon turning, mixture darkening, scent thickening until it was unbearable, a perfume that clung inside the lungs. She closed her eyes, and behind them she saw the long table already laid, silver gleaming, wine poured, candles burning with flames that leaned sideways, though no wind stirred. She saw the faces of the masters, the wives, the overseers, their mouths open in laughter that would not last the night. She saw them reaching for her dish, their forks gleaming, their lips glistening, their throats ready to swallow what she had stirred. And she saw their faces change, the sweetness lingering too long, turning ash, their eyes widening, their hands clutching at their necks, the laughter falling silent. Her spoon scraped the pot hard, dragging metal against iron, and the vision shattered. The smoke recoiled, swirling, collapsing into itself like a beast denied its meal, and the voices shrank into whispers once more. But the last voice, the steady voice, lingered still, brushing against her ear like a finger. 13 must feed. The syrup boiled harder, spitting upward as though trying to leap from the pot. And for the first time Miriam felt fear not for herself, but for the house that held them all. The walls creaked, the rafters groaned, the very floorboards shifted, as if they too had heard the command and prepared themselves. She pressed the spoon down hard, forcing the bubbling back into stillness, whispering through her teeth, "They will, they will. Only silence me now. The smoke thinned, not gone, never gone, but hiding, slipping into the cracks of the beams, into the hollows of the walls, into the seams of the floor, waiting. Miriam stood alone in the kitchen once more, but the air carried weight, the kind of weight that did not leave. The spoon dripped with syrup blacker than it should have been, and the drop that fell upon the floor hissed as though it burned through the wood. She bent low to pour the mixture into the waiting dish, and as she did, the smoke trailed after her like a shawl, clinging, whispering still, her name, her name, her name, a sound that would not fade, and when she lifted her head, her eyes burned as though she had looked too long into fire, for she knew now the smoke was not hers alone, it was theirs, and it had chosen her to carry what must be carried. 13 must feed, and in the rafters above, the beams pulsed once dark, heavy as if breathing. The whispers did not fade. They sank into the walls, into the air, into the silence that would soon fall upon the house like ash. And in that silence, waiting beyond the walls, the crickets faltered in their song, the first omen of the feast to come. The spoon struck the surface of the pot with a sound that did not belong to the kitchen. It was not the scrape of wood against iron, not the simple rhythm of cooking, but something deeper, heavier, the sound of earth falling against coffin lids. Each turn of the spoon pulled the room into silence. As though all else had to pause and listen, each circle carried weight, and with every stroke the sweetness darkened, growing thicker, less like sugar and more like blood left too long in the sun. Miriam counted without speaking, her lips still, but in her chest each number pressed against her ribs like a blade. 1, 2, 3. The air thickened. Syrup scented, suffocating. 4, 5, 6. The smoke curled upward, then sank low again, folding back against itself like wings pressed tight. 7, 8, 9. The rafters groaned, though no storm leaned against the house. 10, 11. The pot hissed as though alive, the sweetness bubbling with breath. 12. Her hand trembled, the spoon heavy, though the mixture was not enough to warrant the weight. The room held its breath. Even the fire bent inward, its flame still drawn to silence, and then came the stroke that was never meant to be taken lightly. 13. The 13th spoonful cut through the air, slow, deliberate, trembling the space around it as though time itself recoiled. The air shivered, the beams rattled. A sound like chains dragged across stone rolled through the walls. The spoon pressed hard against the edge of the pot, and with it came a sound that was not metal, not wood, but the tolling of a bell far off, a funeral bell, deep, aching, calling no living man. Only graves long closed. Miriam froze, her fingers locked around the handle, her breath sharp and shallow, her eyes fixed upon the bubbling mass that now glowed faintly red in the dim firelight. And in that glow she saw faces. They rose in the surface like reflections upon water. Thin faces, hollow eyes, mouths wide as though mid-cry, mid-prayer, mid-scream, her mother's voice, her grandmother's voice, voices she had never heard but knew belonged to women who had stirred before her, whispered through her bones, "It is done, it is owed, it will be taken." Her throat tightened, her chest heavy, yet her hand did not release the spoon. The 13th circle was complete, and there could be no undoing. The mixture heaved, swelling against the rim of the pot as though it wished to escape. Thick bubbles rising, bursting with a hiss that sounded too much like breath, too much like laughter. From the corner of the room, a shadow moved where no body stood. Tall, thin, bending, watching. Miriam's heart hammered, but her eyes did not stray. She knew if she looked too long, the shadow would take form, and if it took form, it would not leave. The 13th spoonful lingered in her hand, dripping black sweetness that fell slow, each drop thudding against the surface like nails driven into wood. Her lips parted, and she whispered to the pot as though it were a listening ear, "Take them. Take what is owed. Let silence sit at their table." The house groaned again. Rafters creaking, floorboards shifting, the sound of old wood bending beneath a weight not present. Outside, the night pressed close. The crickets halted mid-song, the fields too still. As though the very soil had paused to listen, the 13th spoonful slipped from her grasp, falling back into the pot with a splash that shook the table. And with it came silence, not the silence of peace, but the silence of breath stolen, the silence of earth piled high, the silence of graves sealed tight. Her body trembled with the force of it, her eyes burning with tears. She did not weep, for she knew what the 13th meant, a promise sealed, a debt called, and somewhere beyond the kitchen walls, beyond the house itself, Something had heard. The wind rose sudden. Though no storm brewed, the shutters rattled. The door strained against its hinges, and in the dark, thin voices carried back to her. The same ones that had whispered through the smoke. But louder now, stronger now. 13, 13, 13. They chanted the number as though it were scripture, as though it were a key turned in a lock, as though it were the only word left in their mouths. Miriam's knees weakened, but she did not fall. She clung to the spoon, the pot, the promise. The fire flared green, then sank low. Embers pulsing like a heart struggling against stillness. The mixture settled, quiet now. But its surface rippled as though beneath it lay currents too strong to be contained. And in that silence she saw it clearly. The table yet to be laid. The silver polished, the plates gleaming. And on that table, the dish she would carry, heavy with sweetness, heavy with silence. 13 sat waiting, though not all had yet taken their seats. Their faces blurred, half-formed, but she knew them. Overseers with cruel hands, masters with crueler mouths, wives with eyes that looked but did not see, and above them, unseen, the smoke bent low, pressing against their shoulders, eager, hungry, whispering still. The 13th spoonful had been stirred, and nothing could stop the feast to come. Miriam closed her eyes, her lips parting with words she did not own, but words that passed through her all the same. The graves are ready. The fire flickered once. The smoke curled tight, and the spoon in her hand grew cold as iron left too long in the ground. And when she opened her eyes again, the room seemed darker, smaller, the air heavier, for with the 13th spoonful, the kitchen was no longer hers. It belonged to them, the unseen, the waiting, the unquiet dead, and from the rafters above, something dripped, thick, sweet, dark, falling into the pot with a hiss, as if the house itself had begun to bleed sugar into her mixture. The 13th spoonful had been stirred, and the air trembled still, and in the silence after, the bell tolled again, unseen, unheard by all but her, summoning not worshippers but graves that waited to be filled. The table stretched longer than memory, longer than the room could hold, yet it stood without bending, without breaking, as though space itself bowed to the will of those seated there. Silver clattered, goblets tipped, wine spilled red across the white cloth like veins slashed open, but no one paused, no one noticed, for their laughter was heavy, sharp, meant to drown out silence itself. Yet beneath the floorboards, softer than a sigh, laughter rose too, not the laughter of the living, but laughter dry as bone, thin as dust, laughter that did not need mouths to carry it. Miriam stood at the edge of the room, the dish in her hands heavy, as if it bore the weight of graves. Her steps were slow, deliberate, though her eyes stayed low, never daring to rise above the glimmer of the tablecloth. She heard the masters, the wives, the overseers, their voices thick with wine, their words swollen with self-satisfaction, the kind of joy that came from believing the world itself bent to them. But the dessert in her hands gleamed under candlelight with a brilliance unnatural, as though it were polished stone pulled from a crypt. It shone like a sacrament, holy in its false perfection, hiding within its sweetness a hunger that was not hers, not theirs but older, darker, waiting. When she placed it down, the table seemed to tilt, the goblets trembling, the knives shivering against porcelain, and for the smallest breath of a moment, the laughter faltered, a pause no one could explain, a pause that felt like a throat closing. But then they laughed again, louder, as if to silence the moment, as if to crush the unseen weight that had pressed against their chests. Candles flickered, leaning toward the dish as though drawn to it. The dessert sat perfect, untouched. Yet already the room leaned closer, bodies shifting, hands twitching, eyes flicking though they pretended otherwise. Something in it called, something in it beckoned, something that whispered across the skin like breath from a mouth not present. Miriam stepped back into the shadows of the room, her eyes low, her lips sealed, but her heart beat with a rhythm that matched the toll of bells. From beneath the floorboards the laughter swelled, thin, shrill, mocking, though none at the table seemed to hear. They raised goblets, toasting, their voices ringing false as brass. Yet even their toasts bent unconsciously toward the dish at the center. One reached first, a silver spoon in hand, the light glinting sharp against its edge. The spoon dipped into the sweetness, breaking its surface, and for a moment the room fell still. No laughter, no sound, no breath. The sweetness clung to the spoon too thickly, dripping slow, stringing itself thin like tar pulled from the earth. The master who held it raised it to his lips, his laughter returning but quieter now, uncertain. Though he did not understand why, the sweetness touched his tongue, and his eyes widened, not with delight, not with satisfaction, but with something he could not name. Still he laughed, though the laugh caught in his throat, sharp, broken, and he swallowed hard. As if to hide the falter, the others followed, spoons dipping, silver clattering, wine spilling, yet still none noticed the laughter that rose beneath their feet. Miriam pressed herself against the wall, the shadows cloaking her, though she felt them watching her too, unseen eyes behind the smoke, behind the beams, behind the walls. Her lips barely moved, but her voice slipped between her teeth like a hiss. "Eat then, eat what you asked of me. Eat what you made me carry." The laughter beneath the floorboards rose higher, sharper, a chorus of the long dead who had waited too long. The candles bent low, their flames stretching sideways as though reaching for the spoons. The lips, the throats, and the dessert, perfect. Gleaming, innocent, seemed to shift, its surface rippling though no hand touched it. Though no air stirred, the sweetness concealed a hunger, and that hunger had begun to wake. The masters laughed still, the wives smiled still, the overseers leaned close still, but their laughter was thinner now, weaker now, as though already pressed beneath the weight of silence. Miriam's hands tightened into fists, her nails cutting her palms, her body trembling not with fear, but with the force of what moved through her, what she had stirred, what she could not stop now. The table shook, faint, a tremor that rattled silver, that sent wine quivering in goblets. Though no one spoke of it, they raised their spoons again, eager, hungry, oblivious, and as they did, the floorboards beneath them groaned deep, as though pressed by the weight of something unseen, something rising. Miriam closed her eyes, her breath sharp, and she heard it, the sound not of wood splitting but of earth shifting, a grave opening, slow, deliberate, beneath the table where they sat. The laughter from below broke into weeping, thin, sharp, endless weeping. Though only she could hear it, her eyes opened wide, and for a moment she saw it. The table not as it was, but as it would be, 13 seats filled not by masters, not by wives, not by overseers, but by shadows, their faces hollow, their hands blackened, their eyes bottomless. And in the center the dish gleamed still. Sweeter than sugar, heavier than blood, the master's table had been set, and it would not be emptied by the living. Silver clattered again, louder this time, but it did not sound like silver. It sounded like bones dropped into a pit, and as the first of them swallowed a second spoonful, Miriam felt the house itself shudder, felt the air press in. The hunger hidden within the sweetness opened its eyes, and the floorboards beneath their feet began to crack. The candles did not burn as they should have. Their flames swayed not with draughts, not with breath, but as though they leaned toward a single body, drawn by a pull older than fire, older than light. Wax dripped thick, slow, heavy, not pale but black, tar-like, falling upon the tablecloth in glistening stains that spread like shadows. The white linen, proud, pure, spotless, grew corrupted stroke by stroke, as though the night itself had chosen to reveal itself through wax, and the guests did not see it, or perhaps they would not see it. Their eyes glazed with the sweetness upon their tongues, their laughter faltering, but Miriam saw, standing at the edge of the room, half shrouded, half revealed, her chest rising with a rhythm that no longer belonged to her, every flame bent toward her, straining as though to worship or to accuse, their orange light flickering like tongues eager to name her secret. The table glowed in shifting light. Silver gleamed, then darkened. Wine flickered red, then black. Eyes shone, then dulled. The wax gathered in pools, each drop hitting the cloth with the weight of a heartbeat. Drip, 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 13 beats that echoed the strokes of her spoon. 13 marks upon the white cloth that no washing would ever cleanse. The laughter dwindled, broken into coughs, choked chuckles, throats tightening as though each mouthful turned thicker within them. A woman raised her goblet, but the wine within had darkened, thickened, its surface trembling, as though something beneath it pressed upward. Her lips touched the rim, but she faltered. Lowering it with a frown she could not name, the candle nearest her leaned low, its flame bending until it licked the rim of her glass. A hiss rising, faint but sharp, as though the fire rejected her. Miriam's eyes followed the drip of wax, each drop landing not random but deliberate, as though spelling out a word no living tongue should read. The overseer at the far end laughed still, forcing it loud, brash. But his laughter broke sharp when a drop of wax fell upon his hand. He cursed, shaking it, yet the mark remained, a stain blacker than soot. Burned into his flesh, though no heat had touched him. He hid his hand beneath the tablecloth, trembling, pretending. But Miriam saw, she whispered low, lips barely parting, "Their light knows what they do not." And as though answering, the flames bent lower, their glow stretching toward her, their shadows lengthening behind the guests, until each shadow touched the floorboards, joined, fused, spreading black as though beneath the table sat one great shape, not many. The wax fell faster now, dripping thick, staining deeper, flowing like veins across the cloth, each thread surrendering to black. The guests shifted uncomfortably, tugging at collars, loosening sleeves, yet still lifting spoons, still dipping into the sweetness, though each bite seemed harder to swallow. The air thickened with the scent. Not sugar now. Not wine, but smoke. The smoke of tallow, of burning cloth, of something unseen pressing against the walls. The laughter beneath the floorboards rose again. Louder, harsher, mocking, a chorus of thin, dry throats. The masters did not hear, the wives did not hear. The overseers did not hear, but Miriam heard, and the flames heard, and the wax heard. Each drip fell in rhythm with the voices, as though the candles wept in answer to the dead. And one by one the guests grew silent. Not by choice, not by recognition, but by force their voices caught. Their words dried, their throats closed. The silence thickened, pressing, aching, as though the air itself forbade them to speak, and still the candles wept. Their tears black, their flames bent, their shadows stretching. One guest at last noticed, his eyes widening at the stains spreading. The cloth blackened, the wax pooling like tar around his plate. He rose, his chair scraping, but the wax spread faster, climbing the legs of his chair, seeping across his boots, holding him as though the floor itself had claimed him. He gasped, pulling, jerking. But the candles bent toward him now, every flame stretching. Tongues of fire reaching, hungry, he screamed, yet his voice broke, silenced. The sound swallowed before it could rise, and still the others sat frozen, unmoving, faces pale, spoons clutched in trembling hands. The wax climbed higher, spilling across the table, dripping down goblets, binding forks, silencing silver. Miriam closed her eyes, her voice thin as a reed in the wind. They will see now. They must see. The candles flared as if in answer, light bursting, shadows tearing, the table drowned in orange glow. And for a single moment every face turned toward her. Their eyes wide, lips parted, but no sound came, only silence, broken by the hiss of wax drowning cloth. And then the flames bent lower still, until they nearly touched her hands, her dress, her hair. Yet they did not burn. They hovered, reverent, accusing, worshipful. Every flame bent toward Miriam, as though the secret she carried weighed heavier than the walls, heavier than the dead. And with a hiss sharp as a serpent's breath, the largest candle split, its wax pouring black upon the dish at the table's center, staining the sweetness, drowning it. The dessert shivered as though alive, its surface rippling, quivering, groaning. And the wax sank into it, vanishing as though swallowed whole. The table shook, goblets fell, silver clattered, and beneath the floorboards, the laughter rose into screams. Screams that rattled the beams, shook the walls, pressed against the ears of every guest. And still the candles wept black, still they leaned toward Miriam, still they named her by flame alone, until at last one candle went out, snuffed without wind, without breath, leaving a coil of smoke that shaped itself into a hand that reached across the table, across the dessert, across the guests, a hand that pointed, slow, deliberate, toward the empty chair at the far end, the 13th seat. The first sound was not a scream, but a cough, a sharp, wet cough that tore through laughter like a knife through cloth, silencing one voice while the others faltered mid-word. Then another cough followed, harsher, strained, scraping from a throat that fought against something unseen. And then another and another, until the rhythm of laughter had been replaced with the cadence of choking. One by one, voices collapsed, each sound thinner, weaker, broken, as though the very air had thickened into rope and drawn itself tight. The guests clutched at their throats, eyes bulging, lips trembling. But no words passed, no prayers escaped. The sweetness on their tongues curdled into ash, the wine in their bellies turned to tar, and their throats closed around it all like a noose tightening with each swallowed breath. The overseer at the far end clawed at his neck, nails raking skin until red blossomed beneath them. But no relief came, only deeper silence. A woman's goblet toppled, rolling across the table, spilling what should have been wine but fell thick, black staining the cloth already heavy with wax. Her mouth opened wide, her jaw trembling, but what left her lips was no cry, only a low wheeze like wind pressed through broken reeds. The silence that followed was sharper than screams. It rang through the rafters, cut through the beams, pressed into the floorboards, until even the laughter beneath them fell still. Miriam stood in the shadowed corner, her eyes wide, her breath shallow, but her body still. This was the silence she had longed to hear, the silence no whip could break, no command could shatter, no overseer's bark could pierce, the silence of power shifting, the silence of debts being paid. The table trembled as bodies shuddered, chairs creaked, hands clawed at wood. Yet the air itself held firm, tightening, coiling, forcing breath into nothing. Their eyes turned glassy, bloodshot, veins swelling along necks and temples. A master's tongue swelled thick, filling his mouth, gagging him, pressing out against teeth, drool streaming though no voice escaped. He struck the table with his fist. Once, twice, then weaker, then not at all. Another guest's face turned deep purple. Lips cracked, eyes rolled back, but still no scream broke the silence. It was as though the house itself demanded their silence, forbidding them even the dignity of final words. Candles bent lower, their flames thin, sharp, flickering fast as if feeding on the last breath slipping from each throat. The wax dripped quicker, forming veins of black that spread across the table like roots from a cursed tree. Miriam's fingers twitched at her sides, nails biting into her palms. Her chest rising with each strangled gasp that was not hers. She whispered low, a sound meant for no ears but the shadows. Let it tighten. Let it close. Let them fall as the rope falls. And the shadows answered with movement, bending against the walls, stretching across the ceiling, curling around the table legs like coils of rope drawn taut. Each guest thrashed, but their thrashing grew slower, weaker, the air growing thicker, darker. Their spoons fell from fingers stiffening into claws, clattering against porcelain that no longer gleamed, but dulled beneath the wax. One man fell forward, his face striking the dish itself, sinking into sweetness that accepted him like a grave. His body twitched, then lay still, his throat swollen like a rope burn across his neck. The silence grew heavier, sharper, until it rang louder than screams could ever have. Miriam's eyes glistened in the candlelight, her lips parting in a breath that was half relief, half dread, for she had longed for this silence. Yet in its fullness it felt heavier than chains. The floorboards beneath her feet pulsed, as though the house itself had a heartbeat now, a heartbeat slow, deliberate, terrible. And in that beat she heard whispers rising again, not from the guests, not from the living, but from below. The dead beneath the floorboards stirred, their voices pressing upward, whispering not laughter now but prayer. Prayer in tongues forgotten by the living. Prayer sharp and broken, yet prayers all the same. The ropes tightened further, pulling, drawing, until the last voices failed, until the last gasp sank into stillness. And at last the table sat silent, utterly silent. 13 seats, 13 faces, each still, each frozen, each throat swollen and closed as though hanged from unseen beams. Miriam did not move, not yet. She let the silence sit heavy, filling her chest, her veins, her bones. The silence she had longed for had come, but with it came the weight of something more. For the air did not ease, the ropes did not slacken, the house did not rest. The silence fed on itself, growing, stretching, spreading into corners, into walls, into earth. And as she stepped forward slow, her shadow long against the wall, she saw it. The wax dripping thicker, forming shapes along the cloth, not stains now, but faces, faces pressed into black, hollow-eyed, their mouths sewn shut by waxen rope. The candles leaned toward her, their flames bowing, their shadows pointing to the far end of the table. And in the empty 13th chair the air thickened, a shape forming, vague, translucent, waiting, a figure without breath, without voice, without flesh. A figure that smiled, though its mouth was sewn shut, waiting to be filled. The emptiness sat heavier than the living, heavier than the dead, at the long table of silence. 13 chairs stood, yet only 12 bore bodies, stiffening, throats swollen, eyes wide with final dread. The 13th stood untouched, its wooden back polished, its cushion unwrinkled, its arms unmarked, and yet Its presence weighed more than the others combined. No one dared sit, no one ever had, and yet all who entered the room felt it. The 13th chair waited, patient, demanding. Its emptiness a hunger greater than mouths could ever hold. Miriam's eyes fell upon it, and her breath caught in her chest. The air thickened, pressing, as though unseen hands coiled ropes about her ribs, tightening, reminding her of debts yet unpaid. The guests sat silent, slumped, gone, but the emptiness lived, breathing, whispering, louder than their silence. She heard it in the walls, in the beams, in the floorboards that pulsed as though blood moved beneath them. The emptiness whispered without words, calling, promising, summoning, and the candles bent toward it, their flames curving. Shadows stretching long across the table, gathering around the chair as though bowing. Miriam took a step forward, the wood beneath her feet groaning. Her eyes would not leave the chair, though her body screamed to look away, to turn, to flee. The 13th chair gleamed, its emptiness alive, its vacancy filled with a presence too heavy to be called absence. Every breath in the room moved toward it. Every flicker of fire bent in its direction. Every shadow deepened at its feet. The dead beneath the floor whispered louder, pressing upward, their voices tangled, urging, warning, demanding one seat, one seat, one seat. Miriam's hands trembled, her fingers twitching as though pulled, as though strings bound her to the wood. The silence grew unbearable, ringing in her ears, pressing against her teeth, filling her skull with a hum that was not hers. And still the chair remained empty, its vacancy more full than the bodies that slumped beside it. She whispered through clenched teeth, her voice breaking against the weight of the silence. I stirred for them. I carried for them. I brought the silence. Is that not enough? The air answered with a groan, deep, low, rattling through the beams, shaking the plates, tilting the goblets. The chair creaked though no one touched it, its legs scraping faint against the floor as though shifting to face her. Miriam stumbled back, her heel catching on the boards, her body trembling. But the emptiness pulled, heavy, demanding, relentless. Her breath came shallow, her chest burning, and she knew if she resisted much longer, the silence would take her too. The faces on the tablecloth as waxborn black, hollow-eyed, turned their gaze toward the 13th chair, their mouths sewn shut, but their meaning clear. It was not enough to silence 12, one more must sit, one more must join. The 13th would not remain empty. Not forever. Miriam felt her knees weaken, her body bending against her will, her feet dragging forward though she clutched at the wall, nails scraping wood. Her shadow stretched long across the floor, pulled toward the chair, joining the others that gathered at its feet. The silence grew deeper, heavier, until her heartbeat itself seemed stolen from her. Leaving her chest hollow, she whispered again, tears burning her eyes though they did not fall. Not me, not me. It cannot be me, but the emptiness answered not with denial, not with mercy, but with presence. The chair pulsed, groaned, the cushions sagging as though weight pressed upon it. Though no body sat, the air warped above it, bending, trembling, forming shapes vague, translucent, shifting between smoke and shadow, a figure unseen yet present, faceless yet smiling, breathless yet breathing. It sat without sitting, leaned without moving, its weight heavy upon the world though it carried no flesh. The 13th chair was no longer empty, and yet it demanded still, hungrier now, heavier now, its presence reaching outward, pulling her closer, closer. Miriam pressed her hands to her ears, but the silence screamed through her palms, a silence so sharp it carved into her mind. The guests did not stir, the house did not ease, the air did not soften. The 13th chair breathed, and with each breath the candles bent lower. Their flames hissed, sputtered, darkening, until wax poured not slow but steady, drowning the table, covering the bodies. And when Miriam dared glance once more, the faceless figure turned its hollow gaze toward her. Its smile widened, though its mouth was sewn shut, and its hand, pale, thin, boneless, lifted slow from the armrest, pointing, straight and sure, at her. The night did not move. The fields beyond the shutters stood still, every stalk of cane stiff, every blade of grass frozen, as though the earth itself had stopped breathing. Not even the wind dared stir, and yet, through the stillness, through the heavy silence that pressed against the windows like a shroud, the crickets sang, their voices sharp, insistent, endless, but their rhythm was not the rhythm of summer nights. Not the song of warmth and life, it was funeral. It was cadence slow and deliberate, like the beating of a drum carried to graves. Each chirp struck like iron against bone, a steady toll. A warning whispered in the language of the small and unseen. Miriam stood by the shuttered window, her hands trembling though she dared not press them open, for she knew if she looked upon those fields, she would see more than stalks and soil. She would see eyes in the furrows, mouths in the rows, hands clawing up from beneath the roots. She closed her eyes, but still the hymn pressed into her skull. The crickets sang not to the night, but to the house, to the table, to the chair that still breathed though no body claimed it. Their song wrapped around the beams, slid beneath the doors, seeped into the walls like smoke. It was a litany of warning, of mourning, a chorus for the condemned. Behind her the table sat heavy with bodies, their throats swollen, their faces twisted, their silence deeper than the grave. Yet the hymn did not sing for them. It sang for what lingered still. What moved still, what waited still. The 13th chair. Miriam pressed her palms over her ears, but the crickets' voices sank through bone, through flesh, humming in her teeth, scratching her nerves raw. Their rhythm sharpened, faster now yet still deliberate, still funeral like rope tightening, like shovels breaking soil, like nails hammered into wood. She whispered into the silence of the house, her lips cracking, "Be still, be still. Do not call me." But the hymn grew louder, pressing, swelling, until the shutters rattled though no wind touched them. And for a moment in the swell, she heard words hidden in the song, not her imagination, not her fear, words her name, Miriam. Miriam, Miriam. Her knees weakened, her breath faltered, her throat closed as though the ropes of silence had reached her at last. She staggered from the window, clutching the edge of the table for balance, her eyes darting to the guests who no longer breathed. But in the corner of her sight, she swore she saw them twitch, her hand jerking, a head tilting, a finger clawing against the blackened cloth. Not alive, not dead, moved by the hymn. The crickets sang louder, their funeral chorus a summons, a command. The walls groaned, the beams rattled, the dishes shook, the wine goblets trembled. The house itself seemed to shiver. Caught in the pull of that cursed rhythm, Miriam's breath came shallow, ragged, her body trembling, and she whispered again, desperate, "Not me, not me." I stirred, I gave, I brought the silence. Not me. But the crickets did not falter. Their hymn rose, shrill, piercing, like glass shattering against stone. The shutters bulged inward, bending against the frame, as though the fields pressed their weight against them. And through the cracks of wood, thin legs crawled, not human, not shadow. Crickets, black, endless, swarming, slipping through the seams, clinging to the shutters, the walls, the ceiling. Their wings rasped, their legs scraped, their song now deafening within the room. They poured across the table, over the bodies, into open mouths, into stiffened hands. Their rhythm sharp as nails driven into coffins. The guests did not stir. Yet their faces changed, their silence deepened, as the crickets filled them. And the 13th chair groaned, shifting, tilting, its emptiness no longer patient but ravenous. The swarm bent toward it, crawling, seething, pouring into its vacant lap as though to shape a body that was not yet whole. And in the flicker of the candles, Miriam saw it, the swarm twisting, knotting, shaping limbs from wings, shaping a face from shells, shaping a throat that hummed in rhythm with the hymn. The 13th no longer empty, but filled with a body woven from insects, from sound, from silence given flesh. And as its hollow eyes opened, glowing faint beneath the swarm, the hymn stopped. Silence fell heavier than before, and in that silence Miriam's heart told once, and the swarm turned its head toward her. The sweetness had died. What once gleamed upon silver spoons now blackened and crumbled. Each morsel that had shimmered golden with syrup, each bite that had glistened with sugared promise, had curdled into dust between teeth. Not dust of sugar, but ash, bitter, coarse, unclean. Those who had dared swallow twitched even in stillness, jaws grinding, lips parting, as the grey powder spilled between them. The taste of graves, the taste of wood burned on gallows, the taste of voices smothered beneath earth. Their tongues, once eager, swelled thick and heavy, blocking words, choking prayers, floating with secrets unsaid. Their eyes rolled upward, not toward salvation, but toward the ceiling beams. Finding not heaven, but wood stained with smoke, Miriam stood among them, breath sharp, body trembling. And though her lips had not touched the dessert, Her mouth carried the phantom taste of ash. It coated her tongue, though she had not swallowed. It thickened her breath, though she had not eaten. Her stomach lurched as though something unclean had already entered her. She whispered, voice thin. It spreads even without tasting. The candles sputtered, coughing black smoke into the air, their flames guttering low. The ash fell not only from lips but from the very air, snowing across the table, drifting onto plates, filling goblets clinging to lace, and beneath each speck lay weight. Not the lightness of dust, but the heaviness of the grave. Each particle settled with the gravity of bone, the burden of rope, the silence of earth pressing down. Miriam brushed at her arm and found her sleeve blackened. Coated with fine grit that burned against her skin, the air thickened with it, each breath heavier, harsher, leaving her throat raw. She coughed once, sharp, sudden, and for a moment her hand came away grey, ash on her palm, ash in her lungs, and the bodies at the table twitched again, lips parting wider as more dust poured, spilling thick, choking the air. The sweetness had turned, the feast curdled, and still the 13th chair sat filled with its swarm. Its form woven from wings and shell, it leaned forward, boneless, its mouth opening, though no tongue lay within. From that hollow maw poured more ash, a storm of it, grey, bitter, endless. The hymn of crickets replaced by the hiss of dust spilling like sand through an hourglass. It coated the table, the floor, the beams, the house filled with it. A storm within walls. A storm without wind. Miriam staggered, coughing. Her eyes watering, her chest burning. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to seal herself from the storm. But the taste seeped through the bitterness piercing skin. Her knees buckled, her vision swam, and in the blur she saw them, the guests. Still seated, still dead, yet their jaws worked. Chewing, grinding, chewing. Their teeth split with the sound of stone on stone. Cracking, splintering, spraying grey. They chewed not food but ash. Not life but death. Their throats swelled. Their chests heaved. Their eyes rolled. And though they did not breathe, ash poured still, pouring endlessly. The feast continued, eternal, grotesque, unstoppable. Miriam's body bent, her stomach retched, though nothing came but grit. The ash coated her tongue, her lips, her teeth. Her words broke apart in her throat, falling into silence before they could escape. And then the voices rose, not from the guests, not from the living, but from the ash itself. Whispers, thousands, countless, swirling with the storm, searing her ears, filling her skull. Eat, eat, eat. Air command, relentless. The swarm in the 13th chair leaned closer, its hollow mouth gaping wider, and the storm thickened. Filling plates again, piling high, the ash shifted, twisted, shaping itself upon porcelain into forms. A sugared cake, now grey and brittle, a candied fruit, shriveled, powdering into dust at the edges, a bowl of syrup, hardened into black grit. Miriam stumbled backward, shaking her head, whispering broken, "I will not, I will not, I will not." But the whispers grew louder. Eat, eat, eat. Her knees struck the floorboards, her hands sinking into layers of dust that now covered the planks, thicker than soil. She looked down and saw the board split, cracking open, ash pouring not only from the table, not only from the swarm, but from the earth beneath. The house itself bled ash, the foundation exhaling it like the last breath of a dying beast. Her palms sank deeper, her fingers clawing through grit, until bone scraped against them. Skulls, ribs, teeth, buried shallow, pressed beneath layers of dust. Now freed, her breath caught. Her scream died, and when she lifted her head, the 13th chair was empty again. But the ash did not stop. It gathered in the seat, swirling, thickening, shaping, and from it rose a hand into grey, powdery, fragile as soot, that pointed straight at her mouth. The silence did not end when the throats closed. It did not end when the last gasp fell still. It did not end when the ash settled, nor when the swarm withdrew, nor when the 13th chair emptied again. The silence lingered, thick, swollen, alive. It pressed into the beams of the house, into the floorboards, into the earth itself, and once planted, it began to feed. The silence fed not on voices, not on words, but on the memory of sound. It stripped the room of echoes, of laughter that had once lived there, of screams that had once rung. The silence devoured all, multiplying as it consumed, growing vast and heavy, and Miriam stood within it, her breath caught, her body trembling, yet her lips curved at last into a smile, for it was not hers alone. It was silence shared, silence eternal, silence that no lash could cut. No chain could bind, no master could break. The silence was free, and in its freedom it spread. 13 gone, and yet the air did not lighten. 13 gone, and yet the shadows did not fade. The silence claimed the room, then the house, then the land that cradled it. It slid through the shutters, seeped into the fields, coiled around the canes, settled in the soil. South Carolina breathed it in, and South Carolina did not breathe out. The fields held still. The crickets fell quiet. The birds refused their song. Even the wind hesitated. For the silence fed on itself now, growing deeper with each moment, breeding more silence from silence, multiplying like plague. Miriam pressed her hand against the table. Her fingers trailing through ash, she whispered, voice raw, thin as thread. "It is done," and the house answered with stillness. No creak, no groan, no laugh beneath the floorboards. Only silence. But in that silence Miriam heard more than she ever had. She heard the weight of the dead pressing against the soil. She heard the chains rattling beneath rivers. She heard the hush of prayers that had been swallowed before they were spoken. The silence held it all, every word unuttered, every scream crushed, every name erased, and it gave it back to her, not as sound but as power. Her smile deepened, though her body bent with exhaustion, her knees trembling as though the silence itself pressed down upon her shoulders. She knew she could not keep it, not contain it. The silence was too large, too hungry, too eternal. It would not remain in her chest alone. It would take root in the earth. It would coil through the rivers, seep into the marshes, crawl across the fields. South Carolina's soil would drink it, hold it, curse it, and no plow would strike the earth without hearing it. No song would rise without choking on it. No prayer would pass without silence pressing against its edges. The silence would never leave. It would feed and feed until the land itself grew hollow. Miriam's eyes closed, her body swaying, and for a moment she felt herself drifting. Not into sleep, not into death, but into the silence itself. The pull was sweet, the pull was deep. The pull was final, but the chair groaned behind her, reminding her it was not yet over. The 13th seat scraped faintly against the floor. Though no one moved it, its emptiness throbbed. A hollow louder than silence. Miriam turned, her breath shallow, and saw it still waiting, still demanding. The silence had not finished its meal. It wanted more, it wanted her. Her smile faltered, but her eyes did not turn away. She whispered barely, her voice shaking, "If I sit, the silence will close." The house answered not. Only the stillness deepened. The wax hardened black across the cloth. The ash thickened on the plates. The bodies sat slumped yet watchful. The 13th chair waited, and in its waiting it breathed. Miriam stepped forward, slow, the boards groaning beneath her, her shadow bending long across the table. The silence thickened with each step, pressing heavier into her lungs. Her fingers brushed the arm of the chair, the wood cold wet, slick with something that was not wax, not ash, not blood. The silence fed on itself, louder now, heavier now, pressing until the house itself seemed to sink beneath its weight. And as Miriam lowered herself, trembling, into the 13th seat, the candles flared once, violent, casting shadows that reached into every corner. The flames hissed black smoke. The bodies lurched, the ash stormed, and then every flame died at once, the house drowned in dark. No sound, no light, no breath, only silence. Vast, eternal, unbroken. A silence that stretched far beyond the house, far beyond the fields, far beyond the night. A silence that settled into South Carolina's soil and would never leave.